Okay, this is chapter 3, creating positive teacher-student relationships, and this is part 1. Okay, so what does the text say about what students value? First of all, like we talked about last week, students really value having a relationship. But one of the things that they need, and they know that they need it, is they need guidelines. Students don't appreciate not having guidelines in the classroom. So if you're going to make a rule, you need to stick to it. You also need to be firm with compassion, okay? So just because somebody says no doesn't make them a bad person. It's how you say no. It's when you say no. The ways that you communicate your ability to manage all the issues in the classroom goes noticed. I mean, it is never unnoticed by students. So, according to Noguera, what students really value is firmness in the classroom. That's either a firm yes or a firm no. Being compassionate and having an engaging and challenging teaching style. So, for example, if you are teaching '11th grade English, should you be giving work that might be given to a 5th grade class? Probably not. You need to have engaging work to do, real work. We're not talking about just keeping kids busy. Actual, real, thoughtful work. Now, Colbert and Wilson, they did a study in the early 2000s, like 2001, and they asked students what they valued in a teacher. They actually just asked students, and students told them that they liked a teacher who made sure that work got done. Okay, so if you're supposed to finish a project, they made sure that it got finished. They liked having a controlled classroom. Students don't like having a classroom where they don't know what's going to happen next. They want teachers that are willing to help students. If you have a problem, students should be able to get some help from you. Who explained the assignments more than once if necessary. But they also enjoyed having the routine varied, simply because it gave a little bit of difference to the classroom. Okay, and I don't remember exactly what I was going to write here. I must have lost my train of thought. But they also value, I'm sure, taking time to know what students actually need. Okay? Because I remember reading this article, and I know that they talked about that. Okay, so Woolfolk and Weinstein. Now, Woolfolk, we're talking about Anita Woolfolk Hoy here, okay? Woolfolk is from Ohio State, and she also has done a great deal of research on teaching efficacy. Now, what she says is that we need to make sure that we have caring relationships happening in the classroom, because we can't teach if we don't have a relationship. Having limits for a safe environment. And remembering that learning is supposed to be fun, okay? It's not supposed to be hard all the time. Now, Winsel talks about a democratic communication style, okay? So there's a little bit of give and take here. He also looks at getting student participation when you're making rules, when you're doing projects. You want to make sure the students are participating, not just raising their hand and answering a question once in a while, but actually thoughtfully participating. Aligning student expectations in with what you're actually teaching. So, what do students actually want to know about this topic? Okay? That's why I always ask, what do you want to know about about classroom management? Oh, is there something particular that you want to learn about? And then providing constructive feedback. Now, giving feedback and constructive feedback are two different things. You can have I remember I had this professor once. She gave feedback, okay? It wasn't always exactly what we called constructive. And I remember one time she gave papers back, and I quickly put my paper in my notebook, because I always had a really hard time looking at anything that she wrote on my paper, because she refused to write in anything except bright red, and she scrawled all over your page, and most of the time she was not very nice about the kinds of comments that she left. Now, she asked me one day, she said, "Aren't you going to look at it?" And I said, I think I'm going to put it through a copy machine first, and then I'll look at it. And I said, because I need to be able to actually look at what you've written instead of look at the color on my page, because I realized that I could not look at that much red. Okay? So yes, it is very important to have constructive feedback, but it's not just writing in red. Okay? And unfortunately, that's usually the only color that when I grade your papers that electronically that it comes out in, so I apologize, but I don't scrawl because it's all typed. Okay? But it's also the words that you use, okay? Be kind with the words that you use, because you want students to do better, not to beat them down, so that they, in the idea that it's going to help them do better, because beating students down doesn't work. Use communication with care and support, okay? So we want to establish rapport with students, and we've got I've got a slide here on at the end of this section called the new 5 R's, okay? And so it's really important to establish rapport with students. So what that means, we have to get to know them. So even if you don't like football, at least find out what the latest scores were, okay? If it's basketball season and you're not really crazy about basketball, find out about one or two of the basketball players. Put a poster on your wall, okay? Find ways to establish rapport with students. Go to football games and basketball games. Yes, it's cold, generally speaking, or really hot in basketball arenas, okay? But students really appreciate seeing their teachers there, especially when you don't have any kids of your own in that school and they know that you came to see them. So find ways of getting to know your students. That could be going to a band concert, a choir concert. It could be just showing up at some extracurricular activity that you know that your students are going to be at, and you want to see them, and you want them to know that you saw them. This is one of those times where showing up is really important, okay? Again, being aware of the sexual harassment issues. Handshakes, pats on the backs, high fives. And in your classroom, you need to discuss the policies of the school. What is okay? What is not okay? What is appropriate touching by teachers? What is not appropriate? And make your room a safe place to go. So when you've made your room a safe place, students are going to be much more likely to come and talk to you when they are feeling uncomfortable. And remember, looking at that ratio of positive to negative statements, okay? Now, I'm not talking, now what it says, what Sprick says, is that there should be a rate of 3 positive reinforcing statements to every corrective response, okay? So that means we're supposed to be more positive in the classroom than negative, okay? That's really what they're saying. Now this one is 1998, but I remember, let's see. I was reading Sprick's research on this in like 95, and he said the same thing then. So now this doesn't mean for every time you put a negative comment on a paper, you have to find 3 positive things to say, okay? It's probably a good idea. But we're talking about overall, okay? So you don't have to say, oh, you missed a period here, but I saw that you put a comma here. That's great. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking overall. Finding, just being positive as a general rule, okay? Now, you also want to make sure that you are not communicating bias. I say communicating bias here, but you want to be aware of when you're doing that, and I would say use it for emphasis if you're going to use it at all, okay? So with Perky and Movac, they are really into communicating those high expectations, okay? So, and they talk about being intentionally disinviting, unintentionally disinviting, intentionally inviting, and unintentionally inviting and intentionally inviting, okay? And we've talked about this a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to bring it out a little bit more. When you think about being intentionally disinviting, you want to look at the idea of what does that mean, okay? So, intentionally disinviting has to do with making a comment that might just be a little bit disinviting without us even thinking about it sometimes, okay? So, I was trying to find this in the text here real quick for you, because they had some really good examples in the text. I'm having a little bit of trouble finding it, but basically when you tell a student, I'm so glad that you came into this classroom, that's intentionally inviting, okay? When a student comes in with their clothes are a bit rumpled, and you just kind of look at them and turn around and walk away, that is intentionally disinviting, okay? Now, we don't always realize that that's what we're doing, but our body language speaks way more than we do. In fact, research says that over 70% of all communication is body language. It's not what comes out of our mouth. It's what we show, what we say very loudly by our body language. So we need to learn what kind of body language we have, and whether or not it is positive or negative. So one really great way to figure this out is to have someone come in and videotape you teaching from the time that students come to your door to the time that they leave. And then watch yourself for sarcastic remarks, for body language, for the different ways that you relate to different students. Look at how you relate to students of color versus students that are not of color. Okay, look at all the different things that you do. What kinds of students do you typically call on? Are you calling more on girls or more on boys? So what kinds of, when you're calling someone down to redirect them, what kind of remarks are you making to them? Do you have any rewards built into your classroom? These are all indicators of having an inviting or disinviting classroom. So, when we're looking at the teacher-student communication, we're looking at communicating high expectations. So we want to look at high expectations versus low expectations. What are we actually asking students to do? Are we giving them work that we know that they can do, or work that they're going to have to work a little bit to complete? So we want to give them descriptive feedback, okay? Tell them exactly what you want them to fix, and you want to give them a way to talk to you. So teach them how to paraphrase their thoughts, okay? Teach them how to be culturally sensitive while you are being culturally sensitive. Now, again, we have a little bit, and the reason I'm bringing these theorists out is because we didn't pick these theorists in class. So, what is culturally responsive teaching? Litkowski and Ginsberg, okay, they came out with some research that looks at, and they looked specifically at culturally responsive teaching. And what they found is that in the classroom, we need to have a common culture that all students can accept. Okay, now, in most of our classrooms, we're going to have kids from different cultures. Now, I'm not just talking about Hispanic and white, okay, or Hispanic, white, and African American, which is mainly what we have here in New Mexico. But I'm talking about affluent children, students who live in poverty, looking at students who have been transplanted from one area to another, okay? Do you have any kids in your classroom that come from the South or come from the Northeast? They are going to experience a different culture than other students in your classroom. So you need to be cognizant of that idea. Looking at not just the color of your student, but also where they come from and the family dynamics that they bring to the classroom. And what I mean by establishing inclusion is that everyone has a part in the classroom, no matter whether they have a disability, no matter what type of disability is present in your classroom, no matter what kind of ethnicity or social understanding that students bring to your classroom. Find a way of making sure that everyone is included in one way or another. That might mean giving jobs to different people in the classroom, rotating those jobs, okay? Having an attitude that everyone in the classroom is relevant. Even that student that just gives you a headache because they are so high maintenance, okay? find a way of making them feel relevant in the classroom. And what you'll find is that their neediness probably will subside, at least to a certain extent. So by doing these things, you're going to be able to give meaning to your students. And when students have respect and a place in the classroom, they're more likely to give you the respect that you need so that you can run the classroom. I remember my first year teaching. I was in Phoenix, and I was teaching summer school, and I was teaching 11th grade English in summer school, and I had about 20 kids in my classroom, most of which had, of course, failed English. A couple of them had slept through English the previous year, and one or two of them were taking English as either 8th graders or 9th graders, and they were wanting to finish early. So, but I had a lot of gang kids in this classroom, and one of the kids, for whatever reason, decided that he liked me, which I was eternally thankful for. And not only because it made my job easier, but because I actually learned quite a lot just by observing his behavior with the other students. Because he was the gang member with the most time in the gang. Okay, so I learned a lot about gang interactions by watching this situation. And he would come up to me at the beginning of class and say, "What are we doing?" And I would tell him. And basically, he took it upon himself to make sure that my work got completed for the day, which I was really, I was a new teacher. I didn't know any better. And it was really very nice to have some support, okay? And so, yes, they did play pranks on me from time to time, but it was really useful to have someone who already had the respect of everyone in the classroom. Because as a new teacher, they didn't know me, and they didn't know what I was going to put up with and what I wasn't going to. And I remember one student made a comment that he did not want. I had everybody going through the King Lear. We were doing King Lear, and they were supposed to act out or read the scene in their groups. Okay, so I had them in groups of 4 and 5. And one young man said, "I'm not going to do that." And he said, "Yes, you are." He said, this is her activity for the day, and so this is what we're doing. And that's when I realized that the person in the classroom who had the most time as a gang member, he was the boss. And so it's very important to understand who has either self-given responsibilities or who has the understanding of some kind of personal responsibility for whatever activity you're doing. And so he decided he was going to take it upon himself to do this. And being a little bit more seasoned now, I probably wouldn't have allowed it. But at the time, considering the makeup of the classroom, his behavior turned out to be very, very useful for me being able to teach that class. And we chose King Lear because they still had to take senior English, and I didn't know what they were going to be doing in senior English, and I didn't want them to have to retake Shakespeare. But my point with this little story is that when somebody has competence in an area, give them some responsibility in the areas that they are competent in, okay? And he was very competent in helping to manage. And so what you're going to find is you're going to have those students in your classroom that are very, very good at managing people. And he was very good at it. So you can learn from their behaviors, because we've got some students out there that are very savvy with human nature. And so we need to take advantage of that and learn from it. So looking at helping students have a motivation to learn, we need to know what their academic needs are. We need to know what their goals are. So in every class, you should have a good idea of what their learning goals are. They should know what it is that they want to learn. So ask them, in this area, what do you want to learn? If they don't have an idea, then let them think about it, because they're going to have to come up with some kind of a goal. Understand how they learn. So understand how the learning process works. Do some research on metacognitive learning. Help them to understand how they learn from a personal point of view. Are they visual learners? Are they auditory learners? Do they need to have something that's more hands-on? So they need to start understanding how it is that they learn. And then create learning goals that are related to those interests and choices. So a lot of times, your first week of school, one of the things you're going to be doing is finding out what their learning needs are. How do they learn best? So that then you can create better projects for them. And then you want to go around and look and see what other people in your school have done. Also, get on the internet and just like some of the teacher websites and find out how people have modeled learning for their classes. Because what we really want to do is we want to help students to experience success in my classroom, okay? What I'm doing in my classroom may not work in your classroom, but the ideas are still the same. So we want to make sure that we are giving realistic and immediate feedback, that we're helping them to self-evaluate. So give them some self-evaluative types of activities, okay? We cannot teach students how to learn on their own, or how to access what other people have learned if they don't know how to self-evaluate. Teaching is not all about grading papers, okay? Sometimes teaching is also about teaching others how to evaluate themselves. And so you want to make sure that they have a safe and a well-organized learning environment. And I know that I fixed this one earlier and it did not fix. I am so sorry. Okay, so again, what we've looked at in your text, it talks a little bit about what do Hispanic students as a group really want or need. They tend to look at more cooperative learning, peer and cross-age tutoring. It tends to work really well. Thematic units, and looking at scaffolded instruction, okay? So we have to remember that they're Hispanic students, African American students, we're talking about this, about the group of students that may have come from more rural type of atmospheres, okay? Teach by themes, okay? And you also want to scaffold all of that instruction so that students have a really good understanding of what skill sets they're going to have to bring into this project to be able to finish it. I've also found that they work very well with project learning, okay? So you teach the information, but then you apply all the information to a project, okay? Kind of like the way that we're doing it in this classroom. I like to teach by projects anyway, because I think that application, you're going to remember the information a lot better when you've actually applied it in some way. So Yvonne and David Freeman, they have also looked at effective lesson planning for ESL students, okay? So again, they're looking at project learning, so in working in pairs or small groups. and also this is a really great way to increase language development. Okay, because when you put an ESL student within a group that has someone who can translate for them, but also where they're going to be hearing the English language, they're going to pick up that language a lot more quickly. And they will also understand the language within context instead of just within isolated words. So anytime you've tried to learn a new language, if you learn the vocabulary by itself, you have a harder time being able to put it into context, especially grammatically. But it's a lot easier to do that when you have put it into context. So what we're really talking about is cooperative learning. Okay? So cooperative learning, groups and things like that, pairs, small groups, even large groups, where everybody has a certain section like a jigsaw. When you're using a jigsaw, then you'll be able to manage the higher levels of thinking in your classrooms. So, like I promised, here are the new 5 R's of education. Relationships, rigor, relevance, respect, and rapport, which we've already been talking about. So, what do we need to consider for this? How relationships are developed and maintained. How important it is to establish positive relationships with students, and how to promote positive relationships between students. Okay, because you remember, if we are not promoting those positive relationships between students, we're going to be having bullying in the classroom. And some other underlying principles are looking at positive relationships with students are key to positive behavior and regular attendance. So when students feel comfortable in the classroom, they're more likely to attend more regularly. They're not going to be skipping out on class, and this is particularly a problem for middle school and high school. Okay, the elementary kids don't tend to do that nearly as much. So just because you don't feel like you have a relationship with a student doesn't mean that you can't build one. Okay, so remember to find out what they're interested in and work from that point. So when you've given them some recognition for the things that they are good at, they are going to help you to build that relationship. And remember that behavioral is always interactive. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just want to stop by. I talked to Holly in Raton.
Mm-hmm.
You have her in a class.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to let you know she thinks the world of you. You've made an incredible impression on her. See if you can pull her out a little more in class. Visiting with her, she's a sharp girl. She's helped me on a lot of things. She's got the knowledge. She just hits the whole whack in class.
Oh, I know she does.
And she's already told me that you can pull her out better than anybody else. But I've seen her in several classes where even the professors are looking over there like, is she even there? So
I ask questions.
direct to her. Good. That's fantastic.
You have
She's
to.
a sharp girl, and she thinks the world of you.
Oh, great. Thank you.
The other thing is, you had told me last semester that you had put together, along with a couple of other people, a reading program, I believe.
Okay, I didn't do it. Can you give me just 1 second so
Yeah.
I can finish this? I've
Yeah.
just got one more here. Okay. Okay, so some potential barriers for establishing positive relationships. So we have to remember that we often have large numbers of students that you have to develop a relationship with. But now in elementary, it's a little bit easier because you have those kids typically all day long. But once you get into middle school, you're going to have to find a way of managing this. One of the things that we found when I was teaching, we did some research in our school district. Pick out students that, and you're going to say hello to different students every day in the hallway. Because when you say hello to students in the hallway, that is going to stick with them longer than when you say hello to them when they walk in your classroom. Now, that doesn't mean you don't say hello when they walk in the classroom. You should do that as well. But that's why that hall duty is so very important, because it helps us to develop positive relationships. Now, for those kids that are not quite so easy to develop a relationship with, again, find things about them that you can comment on. Now, if you find somebody that you just don't know a lot about, ask your colleagues, because even students who tend to get into trouble quite a bit, when we give them positive reactions and we talk to them and we find out what they're actually interested in, then they are going to be more likely to do the thing, to learn in your classroom, so they're going to be more involved.